Well, can you believe it? I've actually had to preach 2 out of the last 3 weeks. Our gospel reading today is about Jesus telling his disciples to go out into the world. It just follows the Beatitudes from last week. And he's telling them that you've been given gifts and talents and abilities, and you must let them show to the world. They're not just for you. Salt is of no use to itself. It only can be used. It can only be used to melt ice or season food. Light has no use to itself. It has to be shared. It has to be put on that lampstand so others can see, so we can see where we're going, so we don't hurt ourselves and stub our toes or whatever, And also a city on a hill. Back in the times of Jesus, they were used as landmarks, so if a ship was out to sea and it could finally see a city up on a hill, it knew where it was in the water. It was a way to guide those and keep them on a straight path, to take them wherever they needed to go. What I really love about these readings this week, though, is that second one of Paul. Paul and I have gotten very close over the last 2 years. I don't know, I've just been drawn to him. And I'd like to talk about that reading mostly, about his weakness, how he didn't have the wisdom so much, but it was just Christ in him. He'll say all the time, it is Christ within me that does all the things that he does. It's not him himself. And I'd like to talk about 5 guys, 4 of them from the Bible, and the 5th one you probably know. The first one is Jonah. God called down to Jonah and said, I want you to go to Nineveh and tell all those people to repent. And if they don't, I'm going to destroy their city. Well, Jonah said, no. He hopped on a boat, and he tried to get away. He ran away. And he tried to go the farthest place he knew, which was Tarsus, which is out on the coast of Spain. But during that trip, a great storm came up, and the sailors on that ship realized it was because of Jonah that God was giving him a difficult time, so they threw him over the board into the water. And he was swallowed up by this great fish, and the fish took him back and spit him out on shore. Guess where? Nineveh, right where God wanted him to go. And so he relented. He said, okay, I can't run away from God. And he went into Nineveh, and within a day, the whole city repented. The power of God. The second guy is one of my favorites, the prophet Jeremiah. And God called to him, and he said, I want you to go to the southern part of Israel and tell them if they don't turn their ways back to me, they've all turned their back on me. If they don't turn back to me, I'm going to allow the Babylonians to come in and conquer them. Jeremiah said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm too young. I don't know what to say. Most prophets think he was only 17 at the time. So you only got 4 more years, Gabby. You better be careful. But God said, I will give you the words. Trust in me. And relentless, Jeremiah finally relented and went and did this missionary work for 40 years. Unfortunately for Israel, they didn't listen to Jeremiah, and they were conquered by the Babylonians and all taken into exile. But Jeremiah did the will of God, and that's what's important. It doesn't always work. The third guy is a guy named Gideon. Now, Gideon was called to God, or God called to Gideon and said, I want you to drive the Mennonites out of Israel. They've been oppressing my people. And Gideon said, no, I'm not doing that. But God said, I want you. And Gideon said, I'm the smallest person. I'm the least person in the least tribe of Israel. Why me? There's so many better people that could do this. Why me? And God said, because I want you. So eventually Gideon relented also. And he gathered 30,000 troops to fight 100,000 Mennonites. And God said, that's too many guys. Get rid of some of them. Tell them if they're scared to go into battle, they can go home. And 20,000 of them left. Then God said, you still have too many. They're going to take this as their pride, that they did this on their own. And they need to understand this is God taking care of his people. So more went home, and he got down to 300 people eventually. And then he said, okay, tomorrow morning you're going to attack, and you're going to use trumpets and clay jars. And Gideon's like, what, are you kidding me? There's 100,000 men over there with weapons. But the night before, God put a dream into all the Mennonites' heads of them being conquered and driven away, that they were going to be slaughtered by the Israelites. And that morning when they heard Gideon and his men smashing the pots against the rocks and blowing the trumpets, it scared them so much they all ran away. The power of God working through Gideon. The fourth guy is the one who wrote the second reading, Paul. Paul was one of the greatest sinners in our history because he actually went out and crucified the Christians. He went out, and when he saw Stephen, one of the first deacons of our church and our first martyr, he watched people stone him because he was so against Christ. But eventually, Jesus called down to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? The last thing Saul ever expected to hear. And in the readings, when you read through Paul, he's in 13, maybe 14 letters, depending on who you believe, of the Bible. Oftentimes he refers to his own sinfulness, how God can forgive, and even through the most sinful of people, can do amazing things. And Paul became one of the greatest evangelists of our church. Part of the reason why Christianity spread all through the world. The fifth one, well, he's just this guy. Some might even call him a loser. He was considering the diaconate about 25 years ago. And like Jonah, he said, no, 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 no. He tried to run away from it, but God wouldn't let him go. So he went into the program, and for 2 years he studied. And he was sitting in front of the Blessed Sacrament one day on a Holy Thursday night, telling God after 2 years of studies, I can't do this. I can't study all this stuff. Vatican II documents, the Hebrew Bible, canon law. It's too vast. There's way too much. I have a family. I have a job. I'm not going to know what to say to anyone. He was pulling out his Jeremiah excuse. I have no words. I don't know what to say. And all of a sudden he heard this voice in his head, Kevin, do you love me? He looked around and thought, well, no one else heard anything. Everyone's still deep in prayer. I must be hearing things, or I'm just thinking weird things. So he went back to his Gideon excuse. There are so many other people who would be so much better at this than me. And again, Kevin, do you love me? Then he knew that God was actually talking to him and had a conversation. Then he pulled out his Paul excuse. I'm a sinful man. There's so many people that are so much more righteous than I. Who am I? You know my heart, Lord. I can't do this. There's so many others. Kevin, do you love me? Well, then Kevin knew that this is what God wanted him to do. And he said, if you want me to get through this, I'm not going to worry anymore. I can't let it stress me out anymore. I can't do this with my family and my job and everything. If you want this of me, Lord, you get me through the last 2 years. 2 years later, he was ordained by Bishop Matthew Clark. And he still didn't know what he was doing. But he got sent to a parish. And a couple years later, he got sent on a mission trip to Jamaica. And then he realized why God had called him to this. That there's people in need around the world. But Kevin is still Kevin. You know? What he's learned is that God works through him, even though Kevin is sinful. He thinks there's so many other people who could do a better job. Who doesn't know what to say, scared to death of preaching. He always will be. He's been doing it 18 years now. Still anxious and can't sleep the night before. But God does give him the words like Jeremiah. That second reading just touched me so deeply because it's who I am. I'm just going to read it again real quick. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness and fear and much trembling. And my message and my proclamation were not with persuasive words of wisdom, but with a demonstration of spirit and power, so that your faith might rest not on human wisdom, but on the power of God. When I read that was me. Because I don't have the wisdom like so many others. I'm not a theologian. But over these years, I've learned to trust Christ. I've learned to let God into my life and just trust him to give me the words, to take me where I need to be, bring people into my life that, would help me along in my ministry. It's a hard thing to do. We want to run away sometimes from God's call. We want to say there's other people who could do it, not me. We realize that maybe we're sinful, we're not up to it, we're not worthy. But none of us are really worthy. We're all sinful. God reaches out and just loves us. And you don't have to think about who you are. Kevin will always be anxious and scared to death of getting up here and preaching. He is a disciple of St. Francis, where he says, always preach the gospel. And if you have to, when necessary, use words. I want to go out into the streets and just live and help. I don't want to stand here and talk in front of anyone. That's always going to be a terrifying thing for me, even though it's been 18 years. But when you look at me, I hope you see maybe a light in the world or this city on a hill, because it's not Kevin standing here. It's Kevin standing here because God asked him to stand here. And God using me to talk to you. And God hopefully getting through to you that he's touching your hearts and knowing that he's calling each and every one of you too to something great and wonderful. There's a little quote I'm just going to leave up there for you to read and think about for a minute. I just pray that you keep your hearts open to God always. And even if you are a loser like me, God can do amazing things.